How would you know if someone was attacking your network right now? Well, if you watched my earlier video about Suricata, you'd know how to detect those threats. But whilst technically effective, the user experience was a bit ew. So I asked if you'd like to make it prettier, and you said, yes please. Welcome back to the Pro Tech Show. There are a few options here, so rather than go too in depth with one of them, I'm going to give you something of a tasting session of 3 that I feel each brings something different to the table. It'll be a high level introduction to each, so you can choose the route you want to go down for yourself. There will also be a couple of notable mentions at the end that didn't quite make the cut, but might be of interest to you. Everything from this point forward is going to assume that you have already installed Suricata, so if you're new here, I highly recommend that you watch the first video where I walk you through it. That will be linked in the description, of course. As a quick recap, Suricata outputs in 2 files. Eve.json contains a lot of data in JSON format, and it's intended for ingestion into another system that can make sense of it. Fast.log is more of a human-readable summary of things that you need to care about, but although it is human-readable, it's not exactly human-enjoyable. Our first option for improving that is Evebox. This is a simple web interface for ingesting and displaying data from Suricata. The main screen is a bit like a prettier version of Fast.log. It's the same information, but formatted more nicely and color-coded. From here, you can archive alerts or mark them for escalation, filter your view to search through the data, or click an alert to get more context, including the full JSON output from Eve.json. You can also click on the Events tab to view the full firehose of Eve.json in a more readable way. The whole thing is pretty lightweight, and if all you want is a way to interact with Suricata's alerts without it looking like a budget version of the Matrix, then Evebox gives you that. The documentation is as basic as a web interface, but installing it is a fairly simple affair. There's a repository for Debian or RPM-based distributions, or a Docker image. You'll find all of them in the GitHub wiki. I'm using Rocky Linux, which is based on Red Hat, so I'll add the RPM repository and DNF install Evebox. It's less than 7.5 meg. You can forward events from another server using an agent, or just install Evebox on the same machine as I've done. For a backend, it can use Elasticsearch or SQLite. For simplicity, I'm going to set it up to SQLite. Obviously this isn't particularly scalable, but it's fine for this use case. The documentation tells you how to start the server interactively, but you'll probably want it running as a background service. I didn't see this in the documentation, but it does create a systemd service, and there's an example config file in a cetera/evebox. Let's copy evebox.yaml.example to evebox.yaml and edit it. Set the data directory, set the database to SQLite, skip down to input and enable it. Now a couple of points here. Evebox supports TLS and a simple authentication, but I'd instead suggest running a reverse proxy like Nginx in the box and doing it there. Evebox seems to be mostly maintained by one guy, so I'd personally feel more comfortable with a more robust proxy in front if it's going to be accessible remotely. I also haven't seen anything in this config file to make it listen on an IP address other than localhost. For the sake of time, I'm just going to leave it, but if you install Evebox, don't neglect the security. Speaking of security, Evebox needs to be eve to actually read Eve.json, so I'll add its user to the Suricata group. One last thing, because I'm not installing Nginx here, I need to kludge it to listen on all IPs, which I'll do by editing the service file and sticking a command line option in here. I'll also need to tell it to use our config file, because by default it actually doesn't. You'll notice the port number is 5636. Your reverse proxy will translate that, of course, but for my example I'll open the port through the firewall and reload the permanent config. There's Evebox. If I generate some alerts in Suricata, you'll see them appear as if by magic. That's a pretty simple option. Now let's jump to the other end of the scale. While Suricata is a handy tool by itself, it can be useful to have a bigger picture when it comes to security. Ideally, you're doing more than just network intrusion detection, so you'll have multiple sources of threat data and you'll probably want to aggregate that together. There are many SIEM types of solutions out there, but I'll quickly show you how you can integrate Suricata into Waza. Waza is a free and open source XDR platform that integrates various other security technologies such as host-based intrusion detection and syslog. More importantly, you can aggregate multiple sources together. If the last example was for a basic quick and dirty way to see Suricata's alerts, then Waza is more for the person who wants to learn about the wider security stack, log analysis, threat hunting, and so on. The technology behind it is actually pretty capable. It's built in Elastic Stack, or rather it's a fork of a fork by default. This is the same technology that powers many expensive commercial solutions, so Waza is kind of doing the same thing for free, which makes it a great way to learn the ropes. In fact, the free tools are now so good, there's no point paying for tools these days. When you pay for a commercial solution, you're really paying for quality of life improvements like reduced maintenance and a real-time feed of threat intelligence and detection logic. That last part is key, because although Waza can do a lot of the same things as super expensive alternatives, you'd better expect to be doing a lot more of the legwork yourself. It's a great tool, but when I last did the maths, it was still cheaper to pay for a commercial solution once you accounted for people's time. Same deal as before, I'll install Waza on the same server as Suricata. This won't be a Waza tutorial because it's quite a beast, and I need a series of videos to do it justice, but I will show you how to stand up a basic install, which is a complete dawdle. Go to waza.com, click install Waza, quick start, then you literally just run this script. I'll be resetting my machine between different tools, just in case you're wondering. Evebox isn't installed anymore. In my case, the script doesn't recognize Rocky Linux, but Rocky is a rebuild of Red Hat, and Waza recommends Red Hat, so although it doesn't realize it, it recommends Rocky too. -I to skip the check and let it rip. This will take a little while. It's considerably bigger than Evebox and requires significantly more resources because of the underlying Elastic Stack. When it's done, it will spit out the admin password, so make a note of that. Allow HTTPS through the firewall, and browse to the web interface. Now Waza has a proof of concept guide for integrating Suricata, which I will link. It tells you to add this to your agent's configuration. Quick tip, if you're going to have a lot of agents, you might want to look into centralized configuration. Instead of editing individual files on individual machines, you can create groups and distribute configuration to agents within those groups automatically. However, I have no agents, so where do I put this configuration? Suricata is on my Waza Manager server. To edit its configuration, it's Management, Configuration, then Edit Configuration over here. Now I just need to pop that local file XML snippet into that to have it ingest my eve.json file. I'm going to put it down with the rest of the log analysis entries here. Click Save, then Restart Manager. Now if I go to Security Events, there's not a lot going on yet because there are no agents reporting in defeated data. Let me generate a few threat detections. By the way, this is the script from testmynids.org that I showed you in the last video. I'm just using the chaos mode this time to make some noise for Suricata. Hit refresh and Waza is now showing some events. You'll notice the dashboards don't really do a lot, because remember, to Waza this is just one data source of what will likely be many. We've not told it to do anything with it. We can build rules to look for certain alerts and react to them, but out of the box here it's just going to log them. The events list is like a prettier version of fast.log, and we can click into it for more context. Because this is Waza's version of Kibana running on Waza's version of Elasticsearch, you have incredibly powerful filtering and queries available to you, so this is a useful tool to do some threat hunting and analysis, and you can build your own custom dashboards if you wish. Did I catch your attention with the word dashboards? If so, you might like the next one. We've got Evebox for those who just want something simple, Waza for those who want to aggregate threat data and go hunting for bad guys. Now here's something closer to Waza, but more focused on Suricata than just everything security. Remember how Waza is using a derivation of OpenSearch, and OpenSearch is a derivation of Elasticsearch? Well, OG Elasticsearch has a pre-built Suricata module ready to go, and it has dashboards. As before, this is not an Elasticsearch tutorial. We'd be here all day. I'll show you a basic install and how to integrate Suricata. Let's go! The place to start is Elastic's documentation. I'll have links to all of these pages in the description. There are the usual options of Docker, Debian or RPM. The R in RPM is Red Hat, and Rocky is a rebuild of Red Hat, so it's RPM for me. This is probably starting to look familiar to you. Create a repository and install with your package manager. You can just follow their instructions. Personally, I'm going to rename it to Elastic rather than Elasticsearch because it's the same repo for the whole stack that we'll be using later. And I'll enable it by default because I'm a rebel. DNF install Elasticsearch and let her go. Pay attention when it finishes because it's going to tell you your password. Make a note of that password. This is for the account with the username Elastic, which is like the master account. Also, pay attention to this line about generating an enrollment token for Kibana. We're going to need that in just a second. First, enable the Elasticsearch service, then start it. Speaking of Kibana, Elasticsearch handles the data and Kibana visualizes it, so we'll install that next. Again, there's a guide. Again, I'm installing from the RPM repo. This is the same repo we just added for Elasticsearch, so you don't need to add it again. Just tell your package manager to install Kibana. By default, Kibana will listen on localhost with HTTP using port 5601. You can change this and you can enable TLS, or you can use a reverse proxy, the choice is yours. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to have it listen on my server's network address and allow the default port through the firewall. In the real world, of course, you should enable TLS, either on Kibana itself or on a proxy. The configuration is in etc/kibana/kibana.yaml. I'll uncomment server.host and set it to my IP address, then save the file. Kibana's default port is a well-known service, so I can add a firewall rule by service name and reload. Now enable the service to start automatically and start it. And after a short delay, you should be able to browse the web interface on port 5601. The first thing it's going to do is ask for your enrollment token. Now grab that command for Kibana, run it with sudo, and make a note of the enrollment token. Paste it in. You'll be asked for a verification code. Where do you find that? Well, in our example, we're running Kibana as a service. So use system control status Kibana to check the status of the service, and you'll see your verification code in your output. If all goes well, you'll be staring at a login screen. The username is Elastic, and the password is the one you made a note of when you installed Elasticsearch. The first time you log in, you'll be asked if you want to add any integrations. We do. Click Add Integrations and you'll be presented with this catalogue. Pop Suricata into the search box, click the button, and then add Suricata. For what we want to do here, the default options are fine. There's a lot of depth to Elastic Stack that you can dig into, but I'm only covering Suricata integration here, so I'll click Save and Continue. After a little think, it will ask if you want to add our Elastic agent to our hosts. That's a component that will collect the logs from Suricata and send them to Elastic Stack. It's going to recommend we deploy a fleet server. That's beyond the scope of this video, and it's unnecessary for our simple single server scenario. If you want to collect data from multiple machines, say if you want to build out Elastic Stack into more of an XDR platform like Waza, then a fleet deployment will allow you to manage agent configuration and updates centrally. I'm going to click Run Standalone. It will display the configuration we need to manually add to our agent because we're not using a fleet server to manage it. The good news is you can skip the bottom section because we've already got our Elastic repo set up, so we can use our package manager. DNF install Elastic-agent for me. Then we need to paste in the configuration to etc/elastic-agent/elastic-agent.yaml. Because we've not used a fleet server, we need to give the agent a way to authenticate. For this demo, I'm going to use my Elastic username and password and save the file. To be clear, that is really bad practice, especially if this was a remote agent. That is a super duper admin account. It shouldn't be in a text file on an agent. The proper way to do this without a fleet server is with a limited permission API key. For the sake of video length, I'm taking a shortcut, but I will link an article in the video description so you can do it properly. Enable and start the Elastic-agent service and we're live. Close this, go to our menu and hit the dashboard button. If we filter the available dashboards for Suricata, we'll see a couple have been installed for us. I'll click on Alert Overview, and at the moment it's looking a little empty. Let's run the test script to make a bit of noise and refresh our dashboard. There we go, we've got some alerts showing up. As with the others, we can click on this little icon to show more details about an alert. If we click on the link to the events dashboard, we get a bit more detail about traffic flowing through our network and some pretty graphs. There's a huge amount more you can do with Elastic Stack. Just look at Waza for an example, but we're going to leave it there for now. A couple of other tools you might also be interested in are Selks and IDS Tower. Selks is the free community edition of Stamus Network's commercial product built in Suricata. I didn't cover it here because although it has its own user interface, it also bundles Elasticsearch with Kibana and EveBox, so there's a lot of overlap. It also means it has 3 entirely separate interfaces for viewing the same data. I kinda wish they just concentrated on their own interface and pulled through a few dashboards from Kibana or something, instead of just chucking everything in there. Their own interface has promise, and you can manage Suricata through it as well. But for me, bundling multiple tools led to a disjointed experience and was a waste of my precious lab resources. I also encountered issues getting it set up with the script failing on multiple steps, and needing to edit its Docker Compose file to get the containers working. There is often a bit of implied jankiness with open source projects. The deal may be that someone's providing you with a work-in-progress version of what is to them a personal passion project, with the expectation that you'll report or even help fix any issues you encounter. That's fine, but when it's offered as a free edition of a commercial product, with disabled menu items to remind you that you need to pay to get the rest of it, then I have a lower tolerance for jankiness. It did have a ton of Kibana dashboards though, so your chances of finding a useful one here are pretty high. As for IDS Tower, I skipped over it simply because it doesn't visualize the output of Suricata, which was the entire point of this video. It is, however, a nice way to set up Suricata and manage its configuration through a web interface, so if you have an aversion to the command line, you may appreciate it. Personally, I think you should learn how to deploy Suricata the way I showed you in the last video, because if you don't understand the components, then they won't mean very much to you in the web interface either. If you're managing a bunch of Suricata hosts though, the ability to set them up in a few clicks and manage their configuration centrally would be pretty nice, and that's exactly what IDS Tower does. It's only free to use with a single host, so that does mean at the point I consider this to be actually pretty useful, you do have to get your wallet out. Ah well, not everything is free. If you really hate using Vim though, you could replace a large chunk of my first video with install IDS Tower on a free license. You should still watch the video so you understand what rule sets are and how to tweak the detections, because that's still pretty important. Let me know in the comments if you're using any of these, and if there are any I've missed. If you need a guide on how to install Suricata, I've got one for you right here. And if you're confused as to the difference between Elasticsearch and this very similar looking OpenSearch thing that Waza is based on, you'll find that all explained down here. Happy hunting!